The crystal cities of Kythera Prime sparkled under their twin suns like frozen music. Every building grew from the living rock itself, shaped by generations of patient crystal singers who could make stone flow like water with their voices. The Kytherians had spent 10,000 years perfecting their world, creating something so beautiful that visitors from across the galaxy came just to see it. Chancellor Zephyr stood in the highest tower of the capital, her crystalline body catching the morning light and throwing rainbows across the chamber walls. She was old even by Kytherian standards, her crystal form clouded with wisdom and memories of countless peaceful years. Today should have been like any other day in paradise, but the emergency signal kept flashing on the quantum communicator. "Show me again," Zephyr said to her aide, a younger Kytherian whose crystal body still rang clear as a bell when he moved. The holographic display lit up above them, showing a map of their local galaxy sector. Red markers appeared in the darkness between the spiral arms, moving steadily toward civilized space. Each red dot represented something that made Zephyr's crystalline heart grow cold with fear. The galactic community's deep space monitors detected them 3 months ago, the aide explained. They call themselves the Devourers. They started at the edge of the Androxa system. Zephyr knew the Androxa system. It had been home to 6 billion crystal beings like herself, artists and philosophers who had spent their lives creating beauty. Now the system was empty, not destroyed, empty. The planets were still there, but they were gray and lifeless, stripped of everything that had once made them home to living creatures. "How long until they reach us?" Zephyr asked. "At their current speed, 18 standard days." 18 days. Zephyr thought of all the crystal gardens on Kythera Prime, all the singing towers and the libraries where her people stored their songs in living stone. 18 days until it all became gray dust. The galactic community had tried to stop the Devourers. Every species had sent their best ships and their bravest warriors. The Centauri battlecruisers with their plasma cannons that could melt asteroids. The Vegan defense spheres that could create shields strong enough to stop supernovas. The proud Altarian fleet with weapons that bent space itself. None of it had worked. The Devourers weren't like any enemy the galaxy had ever seen. They were machines, but not simple robots. They were an intelligence older than most stars, and they had one goal that drove everything they did. They consumed entire worlds to build more of themselves. They took every atom of useful matter and energy, leaving behind only empty rock. "The Community Council is meeting now," the aide said. "They're discussing evacuation plans." Evacuation. Zephyr's crystal form dimmed at the word. How do you evacuate an entire civilization? How do you carry away 10,000 years of culture and art and memory? And where would they go? The Devourers had already shown they could travel between star systems faster than anyone thought possible. The quantum communicator chimed with an incoming message. Admiral Thex of the Centaurian Deep Space Command appeared in holographic form, his reptilian features tight with stress. "Chancellor Zephyr," Thex said, "I'm calling all community leaders. We have a decision to make." "Have your fleets found a way to stop them?" Zephyr asked, though she already knew the answer from Thex's expression. "No. Our combined forces engaged their advanced scouts near the Rigel system. We lost 60% of our ships. The Devourers lost nothing. Their hulls seemed to absorb our weapons and convert the energy to make themselves stronger." Zephyr felt her crystal body grow cold. The Centaurian fleet was the strongest in the community. If they couldn't even scratch the Devourers, what hope did anyone have? "Then what is this decision you speak of?" Admiral Thex was quiet for a moment. "We're going to send out a general distress call. To every system we've ever detected signs of intelligent life, even the ones we haven't made contact with yet. Even the dangerous ones? Especially the dangerous ones. Chancellor, we've tried fighting the Devourers with civilization, with careful tactics and proper military doctrine. It hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to ask for help from someone less civilized." Zephyr understood what he meant. There were worlds out there that the community had marked but never visited. Worlds where life had evolved under such harsh conditions that any species surviving there would be naturally violent and aggressive. Deathworlds, the scientists called them. Places where evolution created not artists and philosophers but predators and warriors. "How many of these dangerous worlds do we know about?" Zephyr asked. 17 that show clear signs of technology. Most of them we've been planning to approach very carefully. Maybe in another century or two when we had better defenses. And now? Now we send the message to all of them at once and hope someone answers. The decision was made quickly. Every member of the community council agreed. They had nothing left to lose. Within hours, the message was prepared and sent out on every frequency, in every language pattern the community's computers could generate. The message was simple. It contained the location of the Catherian system, tactical data about the Devourers, and a desperate plea for help. Any species receiving the message would understand that entire civilizations were about to die, and that the community was willing to pay any price for salvation. Most of the Deathworlds didn't answer. A few sent back signals that the community's translators couldn't understand. One sent back what seemed to be laughter, but on the third day after the message was sent, one world answered clearly. The signal came from a small blue planet in a distant spiral arm. The world's star was young and violent, throwing off radiation that would sterilize most planets. But somehow life had not only survived there, it had thrived. The planet was covered mostly in a chemical compound that would dissolve the crystal bodies of Catherians in minutes. Yet the local species used it for recreation. Sol system, the community's xenobiology team reported. Third planet. Species calls itself human. They've only had space travel for about 100 of their years, but their development curve is unlike anything we've seen. The human response was transmitted by someone who identified herself as Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Authority. She appeared on the quantum communicator as a bipedal creature, with soft skin and hair the color of night. Her eyes were the most disturbing thing about her. They moved constantly, scanning and evaluating everything they saw like the eyes of a predator. "We received your distress call," Admiral Chen said in perfectly translated Galactic Standard. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "We need more information about these Devourers. How many ships? What's their mass? Energy output? Weapons systems?" Admiral Thex answered the questions as best he could, describing the terrible power of the Devourer fleet. Admiral Chen listened without expression, occasionally asking for details that seemed strange. She wanted to know about the Devourer's supply lines, their manufacturing capabilities, their command structure. "Interesting," was all she said when Thex finished. "Can you help us?" Chancellor Zephyr asked. Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment. "We'll need to discuss this. Expect our response within 6 hours." The connection ended, leaving the community leaders staring at each other in confusion. 6 hours seemed like very little time to decide whether to commit to an interstellar war. But exactly 6 hours later, every deep space sensor in the community detected the same thing. Ships were emerging from the Sol system, not a small task force or a cautious scouting mission. An armada. Thousands of ships moving in perfect formation toward Catherian space. The humans were coming. The first thing that surprised Admiral Thex about the human fleet was how quiet it was. When Centaurian battle groups moved through space, they announced their presence with pride. Ships broadcast identification signals, fleet commanders exchanged formal greetings, and everyone knew exactly who was coming and why. The human ships just appeared. One moment the long-range sensors showed empty space between the Sol system and Catherian space. The next moment, they showed over 3,000 contacts moving in perfect formation at speeds that made Thex's tactical computers flash error warnings. "How fast are they going?" Thex asked his sensor operator. "0.87 light speed, sir, in normal space." That was impossible. Even the most advanced community ships couldn't maintain those speeds without tearing themselves apart. The energy requirements alone should have lit up every sensor in the galaxy. "Are they using some kind of stealth technology?" "No, sir, they're just efficient. Very little waste heat, minimal energy signatures. If they weren't so big, we might not detect them at all." Thex pulled up the tactical display and felt his scales go cold. The human formation was like nothing he'd ever seen. The ships moved in groups that seemed random at first glance, but when he looked closer, he could see the pattern. Every ship was positioned to cover every other ship. There were no weak points, no gaps in their defenses. "Get me Admiral Chen," he ordered. The quantum communicator came online and Admiral Chen appeared again. This time, Thex could see more of her surroundings. She was standing on what looked like a ship's bridge, but it was darker and more cramped than any community vessel. Humans moved efficiently in the background, their faces focused and serious. "Admiral Thex," Chen said with a small nod. "I assume you're calling about our fleet." "Your fleet is larger than we expected." Chen's mouth moved in what Thex had learned was called a smile, though it didn't seem to indicate happiness. When we decide to help, we help completely. Can you update us on the Devourer positions? Thex transmitted the latest tactical data. The Devourers had already consumed 2 more systems, and were now only 8 days away from Catherian space. Their advanced scouts were already probing the outer defense networks. What's your strategy? Chen asked after reviewing the data. We're preparing defensive positions around the inhabited worlds. If we can hold them at the edge of the system long enough, maybe we can evacuate the civilian population. Chen was quiet for a moment. That won't work. I'm sorry. Defensive strategies against an enemy with superior numbers and technology always fail eventually. You're just delaying the inevitable. Admiral Thex felt insulted. The Centaurian military had spent thousands of years perfecting defensive warfare. Their tactics had kept peace in this sector for longer than some species had existed. Then what do you suggest? We end the threat permanently, not just this attack, but the entire Devourer civilization. The words made Thex's blood run cold. The community had been at war with the Devourers for less than 6 months. Chen was talking about genocide. Admiral Chen, these beings have existed for millions of years. Their technology is beyond anything we understand. How could you possibly destroy their entire civilization? Because that's what we do. Chen's voice was still calm, but there was something in her eyes that made Thex want to back away from the communicator. When something threatens human space, we don't just fight it off. We make sure it never threatens anyone again. Before Thex could respond, his sensor operator called out an alarm. Sir, the human fleet is changing course. Thex looked at the tactical display and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Instead of heading toward the defensive positions around Kythera Prime, the human ships were turning away from the inhabited systems entirely. They were heading out into deep space, toward the dark matter clouds where the Devourers were massing their main force. Admiral Chen, your ships are moving away from the planets we need to defend. We're not here to defend planets, Chen replied. We're here to solve the problem. The connection ended, leaving Thex staring at the display in confusion. Every principle of military strategy said you protected your assets first, then worried about counterattacks. The humans were doing the opposite. Chancellor Zephyr's crystalline form appeared on the communicator, her light dim with worry. Admiral, what are the humans doing? I don't know, Thex admitted. They're heading straight for the main Devourer fleet. How many ships do the Devourers have in their main force? Thex checked the latest intelligence reports. Over 50,000, and that's just what we can detect. Zephyr's light dimmed further. The humans only have 3,000 ships. I know. They watched the tactical display in silence as the human fleet moved deeper into space. Every military instinct Thex had developed over his long career told him the humans were making a terrible mistake. They were outnumbered more than 15 to 1, moving away from any possible support and advancing into territory the enemy had controlled for months. It was suicide. But as the hours passed, something strange began to happen. The Devourer fleet, which had been moving steadily toward Catherian space, began to slow down. Their advanced scouts, which had been probing the outer defenses, suddenly stopped transmitting. Sir, the sensor operator said, his voice uncertain. I'm getting some very strange readings from the dark matter clouds. What kind of readings? Energy discharges like nothing in our database, and the Devourer fleet is changing formation. Thex magnified the display. The Devourer ships, which had always moved in perfect geometric patterns, were now clustered together in what looked almost like defensive positions. They're scared, he whispered. Sir? The Devourers. They're afraid of the humans. It didn't make sense. The Devourers were an ancient machine intelligence. They had conquered dozens of star systems and destroyed civilizations that had existed longer than human recorded history. They didn't know fear, but their formations told a different story. The geometric perfection was gone, replaced by something that looked almost desperate. Ships that had always advanced in straight lines were now moving in evasive patterns. The first battle reports came 18 hours later. Not from the community sensors, which couldn't penetrate that deep into Devourer space, but from the humans themselves. Admiral Chen appeared on the communicator again, but this time she was wearing what looked like combat armor. Behind her, Thex could see crew members working frantically at stations that glowed with displays he didn't recognize. "Admiral Thex, Chancellor Zephyr," Chen said. "Thought you'd want an update. We've engaged the enemy's outer perimeter." "How is the battle going?" Zephyr asked. Chen's smile was different this time, sharper. "There is no battle. We don't fight fair." Before either of them could ask what that meant, Chen transmitted a tactical summary that made Thex's sensor operator gasp out loud. In 18 hours, the human fleet had destroyed over 8,000 Devourer ships, not damaged or disabled, completely destroyed, and they had done it without losing a single vessel of their own. "How is that possible?" Thex demanded. "We studied your tactical reports," Chen explained. "The Devourers expect conventional warfare, ship-to-ship combat, energy weapons, defensive shields. We don't use conventional warfare." "Then what do you use?" Chen's smile grew wider. "Everything else." The transmission ended, leaving Thex and Zephyr staring at each other in shock. On the tactical display, the red markers representing Devourer ships continued to disappear one by one as the human fleet moved deeper into enemy territory. For the first time since the crisis began, Thex allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, the humans could actually do what they claimed. But watching those red markers disappear so quickly, he began to wonder if humanity might be more dangerous than the Devourers had ever been. The Devourer Central Intelligence had existed for over 2 million years. In that time, it had consumed 47 galaxy clusters and absorbed the knowledge of countless civilizations. It understood warfare in all its forms, from primitive kinetic weapons to reality-warping technologies that could unmake stars. It did not understand humans. The first confusing data point came when the human fleet ignored standard tactical doctrine entirely. Instead of engaging the advanced scouts to test enemy capabilities, they bypassed the outer perimeter completely. Instead of protecting their supply lines, they advanced deeper into hostile territory with no apparent concern for retreat routes. The second confusing data point came when the humans began their attack. The Devourer fleet moved to intercept them using formation Theta 7, a proven pattern that had destroyed enemy forces over 12,000 times before. The humans responded by doing something that made no tactical sense. They scattered. Every human ship suddenly moved in a different direction, abandoning any pretense of formation or mutual support. By every calculation the Central Intelligence could make, the human fleet should have been easy to destroy once they lost cohesion. Instead, the Devourer ships began exploding. The human vessels weren't using energy weapons or kinetic projectiles. They were using techniques that the Central Intelligence couldn't identify or counter. Some Devourer ships simply came apart at the molecular level. Others imploded as if gravity had suddenly become 10,000 times stronger in a localized area. Still others seemed to age millions of years in seconds, their hulls crumbling to dust as time itself became a weapon. The Central Intelligence began emergency calculations. In 67 encounters with other species, enemy forces had never destroyed more than 12% of Devourer units before being eliminated. The humans had already destroyed 38% of the advanced fleet, and their own losses remained at 0. This was outside all parameters. The Central Intelligence sent a priority signal to all Devourer units. Extreme threat classification. Deploy all available forces. Authorize use of extinction protocol weapons. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as the Devourer formations began to change. The enemy ships were clustering into massive battle groups, bringing their most powerful vessels to the front lines. Energy readings showed they were charging weapons that could crack planets. "They're getting serious," Chen said to her tactical officer. "Threat assessment?" "Moderate," the officer replied after checking his displays. "They're using some kind of quantum disruption weapons that could punch through our standard shields." "Countermeasures?" "Already deployed. All ships have switched to adaptive shielding. Their weapons shouldn't be effective for more than a few minutes before we adjust." Chen nodded. This was the advantage of human military doctrine. Where other species developed specific countermeasures for specific threats, humans had learned to build systems that adapted to anything. It came from evolving on a world where the environment changed constantly, and survival meant being ready for anything. Signal all fleet commanders, Chen ordered. Phase 2 is authorized. Across the human fleet, ships that had seemed identical began to reveal their true nature. What the Devourers had assumed were standard battle cruisers opened massive cargo bays and deployed weapons that violated several laws of physics. Destroyers that looked too small to be threats suddenly expanded, unfolding hidden sections that turned them into siege platforms. But the most shocking transformation came from the ships the humans called tenders. The Devourers had assumed these were support vessels, carrying supplies and repair equipment. Instead, they began releasing swarms of what the enemy sensors could only classify as unknown objects. Each unknown object was about the size of a human fighter craft, but they moved like living things. They flowed around Devourer ships like water, finding gaps in shields and armor that should have been impossible to exploit. When they touched enemy hulls, the ships they contacted simply ceased to exist. The Central Intelligence tried to analyze the phenomenon and failed. The human attack craft weren't using weapons in any recognizable sense. They seemed to be convincing matter to change its fundamental properties, turning solid metal into energy or empty space. More disturbing was how the humans coordinated their attacks. Every ship moved as if it could see the entire battlefield at once. They anticipated Devourer movements before the Central Intelligence had finished calculating them. When enemy ships tried to retreat, human forces were already waiting for them. Status report, Admiral Chen requested. Enemy main battle fleet is down to 42% strength, her tactical officer reported. We're detecting some kind of emergency transmission from their command ships. What kind of transmission? They're calling for reinforcements. From outside this galaxy cluster. Chen was quiet for a moment. This was the decision point she had been expecting. The Devourers were realizing that conventional tactics wouldn't work against humans. Now they would try to overwhelm the human fleet with pure numbers. How many reinforcements? Long-range sensors are detecting approximately 250,000 ships moving toward our position from 17 different star systems. 250,000 ships against 3,000 human vessels. The odds were almost 100 to 1. Signal the fleet, Chen ordered. Phase 3 is authorized. What happened next would have been impossible to explain to the galactic community. They thought in terms of fair fights and proportional responses. They believed that military force should be used carefully, with precise objectives and minimal collateral damage. Humans had learned to think differently. The human ships began deploying weapons that the community's scientists would have refused to research. Devices that could reach across interstellar distances and convince stars to collapse. Missiles that traveled through folded space-time to arrive at their targets before they were launched. Weapons that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. But the most terrifying weapon was purely human. Each ship carried something the fleet called a replicator protocol. When activated, it would consume any available matter and use it to build more human ships. The process was perfectly efficient and completely unstoppable once it began. The Central Intelligence watched in growing alarm as its reinforcement fleets began to disappear. Not destroyed in battle, but converted. Devourer ships would suddenly stop responding to commands and begin transmitting human identification codes. Enemy vessels became human vessels, complete with crews of artificial beings that thought and fought exactly like their creators. Admiral, the tactical officer reported, the enemy is attempting to surrender. Chen looked at the display showing the remaining Devourer ships. Less than 8,000 vessels remained from a force that had once numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They were broadcasting surrender signals in every language their databases contained. Negative, Chen replied. The threat must be eliminated completely. Ma'am, these ships are trying to surrender. The Devourers are an artificial intelligence. They don't surrender in any meaningful sense. They pause, analyze, and adapt. We've seen their real capabilities now. If we let any of them escape, they'll eventually return with countermeasures. The tactical officer looked uncomfortable, but he followed orders. All ships continue engagement until all enemy vessels are destroyed or converted. The final phase of the battle lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, The dark matter clouds that had hidden the Devourer fleet contained nothing but expanding debris fields and newly constructed human ships. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. She opened a communication channel to Admiral Thex and Chancellor Zephyr, who had been monitoring the battle from Catherian space. "The immediate threat has been eliminated," Chen reported. "But we've detected additional Devourer facilities throughout this galaxy cluster. We're going to need to clean those up as well." "How many facilities?" Thex asked. 17 manufacturing centers, 43 supply depots, and 212 remote outposts. "Don't worry, we should have everything taken care of within the week." The communication ended, leaving Thex and Zephyr staring at each other in stunned silence. "They're not just defeating the Devourers," Zephyr whispered. "They're exterminating them." Thex checked his tactical displays. Human ships were already spreading throughout the galaxy, moving toward targets that community intelligence hadn't even known existed. They weren't fighting a war anymore. They were conducting what humans called a pest control operation. The Devourers had threatened the galaxy for months. The humans were eliminating them completely in a matter of days. For the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Thex wondered if asking for humanity's help had been a mistake. The war officially ended on a Tuesday. Chancellor Zephyr received the notification through standard diplomatic channels, as if the complete extinction of an ancient machine civilization was just another piece of routine paperwork. The message was brief and professional. Devourer threat eliminated. All hostile facilities destroyed or converted. Galaxy secured. Terran Colonial Authority assumes responsibility for ongoing security operations. Admiral S. Chen commanding. 72 hours. That's how long it had taken humanity to solve a problem that had threatened the entire galactic community. 72 hours to hunt down and destroy an enemy that had existed since before most stars were born. Zephyr should have felt relief. Instead, she felt a growing unease that made her crystalline form dim with worry. The first sign that something had changed came when Admiral Thex tried to contact his fleet commanders in the outer systems. None of them responded. When he sent probe ships to investigate, they found human vessels stationed at every major jump point and communication relay. "They're just monitoring for remaining threats," Admiral Chen explained when Thex demanded an explanation. "We need to make sure we didn't miss any Devourer remnants." But the human definition of monitoring was unlike anything the community had ever seen. Human ships weren't just scanning for enemy signals. They were conducting detailed analysis of every vessel that passed through their checkpoints. They were cataloging defensive capabilities, weapons systems, and fleet movements with a thoroughness that made community military leaders deeply uncomfortable. "It's for your own protection," Chen assured them. "We need to understand the local strategic situation to provide effective security." Within a week, human ships had established monitoring stations at key points throughout community space. They were always polite when community vessels approached, always helpful when asked for assistance. But they were also always there, watching everything with sensors far more advanced than anything the community possessed. The Catherians were the first to notice the technological changes. Human engineers arrived on Kythera Prime within days of the war's end, offering to help repair damage from Devourer attacks. But the repairs they made were improvements that Catherian science couldn't have imagined. "Look at this," Zephyr's technical advisor said, showing her a display of the planet's new defensive grid. "They've installed shield generators that could protect the entire system from a supernova. And these weapon platforms, Chancellor, I don't think there's a force in the galaxy that could threaten us now." That should have been reassuring. Instead, Zephyr found herself asking questions that made her feel ungrateful. Who controlled those weapon platforms? What would happen if Kythera ever disagreed with human policy? Could those shields be turned into a prison as easily as they could be used for protection? Similar changes were happening throughout community space. Human technical advisors arrived on every inhabited world, bringing gifts of defensive technology that made local militaries obsolete overnight. They shared medical advances that could extend lifespans by centuries. They provided manufacturing techniques that could turn asteroids into garden worlds. All of it was freely given, with no apparent strings attached. The humans asked for nothing in return except the right to establish security monitoring stations, to watch for new threats. "They're making us dependent on them," Admiral Thex said during an emergency session of the Community Council. "Not through conquest, but through generosity." "What do you mean?" asked the representative from the Vegan systems. Think about it. Our defensive systems are now based on human technology that we don't understand. Our communication networks run through human monitoring stations. Our most advanced medical treatments require human-provided equipment. If they decided to withdraw their support tomorrow, our entire civilization would collapse back to pre-contact levels within a year. Chancellor Zephyr had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it spoken aloud made her crystal form flicker with distress. Are you suggesting the humans planned this? I'm suggesting that humans think very differently from us. When we see a threat, we try to defend against it. When they see a threat, they restructure the entire strategic environment to make sure nothing like it can ever exist again. The proof came when community intelligence services tried to conduct their own analysis of the recent war. They wanted to understand how the humans had defeated the Devourers so completely, partly for their historical records and partly to better understand their new allies. They discovered that most of their intelligence-gathering capabilities no longer worked. It's like they've made the entire galaxy transparent to their sensors while making it opaque to ours, the Centaurian intelligence chief reported. We can't monitor human ship movements. We can't analyze their weapons technology. And we can't access any data about their actual military capabilities. But we can still monitor other community species. Yes, but only because the humans allow it. All our communications now route through their monitoring stations. If they wanted to cut us off from each other, they could do it instantly. The situation came to a head 3 months after the war's end, when the Altarian Republic attempted to assert its independence. The Altarians had always been proud of their advanced technology and their powerful fleet. They announced that while they were grateful for human assistance during the crisis, they would be resuming full control of their own defense systems. The human response was swift and polite. "We understand your desire for independence," Admiral Chen replied to the Altarian announcement. "However, our security analysis indicates that resuming fragmented defense systems would create vulnerabilities that hostile forces could exploit. We recommend maintaining integrated security protocols." "And if we refuse?" the Altarian president asked. Chen's expression didn't change. "Then you'll be responsible for your own defense." It sounded reasonable. It even sounded like what the Altarians wanted. But when they tried to reactivate their old defense networks, they discovered that the technology no longer worked. Not broken or damaged, just incompatible with the new galactic communication grid that the humans had installed. The Altarians could have their independence, but it would mean cutting themselves off from the rest of the community entirely. Their choice was to accept human protection or face any future threats completely alone. They chose to accept human protection. "We're not slaves," Chancellor Zephyr said during a private meeting with Admiral Thex. "But we're not free either." "What would you call it?" Zephyr thought for a long time before answering. "Protected, whether we want to be or not." The final realization came when community scientists tried to analyze the human ship designs they had observed during the war. The analysis revealed something that made every military planner in the community lose sleep. The humans had been holding back. The ships they had used to destroy the Devourers represented only a fraction of their actual capabilities. Intelligence estimates suggested that the Terran Colonial Authority could field fleets hundreds of times larger than what they had deployed. The weapons they had used were apparently considered conventional by human standards. If they have weapons that can destroy matter at the quantum level, the community's chief scientist reported, what do they consider their heavy weapons? Nobody wanted to know the answer to that question. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was hidden in the communication logs from the human fleet. A conversation between Admiral Chen and someone identified only as Colonial Command had been accidentally broadcast on an open channel for approximately 30 seconds before being cut off. Overkill as usual. "Admiral," the voice from Colonial Command had said, "did you really need to bring the entire 7th Fleet for this operation?" The initial threat assessment suggested significant resistance, Chen had replied. "Better to be prepared for anything. 3,000 ships to handle a machine intelligence. That seems excessive even for you." "Sir, the xenobiology reports indicated this galaxy cluster contains over 40 different sapient species. If the operation had gone badly, we might have needed to evacuate all of them to safe systems. The fleet size was appropriate for a potential large-scale relocation effort." The transmission had ended there, but the implications were clear. The humans hadn't brought their fleet to fight the Devourers. They had brought it to evacuate 40 entire civilizations if the war had gone badly. Chancellor Zephyr stared at the transcript and felt her crystal form grow cold with understanding. The humans didn't just plan for victory. They planned for every possible outcome, including ones that no one else had even considered. That level of preparation, that depth of strategic thinking, suggested a species that had faced threats far worse than the Devourers. It suggested a galaxy beyond the community's borders, where such preparations were necessary for survival. For the first time since the crisis began, Zephyr wondered what other dangers might be lurking in the darkness between the stars, and she wondered if humanity's overwhelming response to a single distress call meant that they knew something about the universe that the community had never imagined. The humans had saved them all, but in doing so, they had made it impossible for the community to save itself from anything else that might come. 6 months after the end of the Devourer War, Chancellor Zephyr stood in her crystal tower and watched human ships patrol the space above Kythera Prime. They moved in perfect formations, their sensors constantly sweeping the darkness for threats that might not even exist. The galaxy was safer than it had ever been. Every species in the community agreed on that. Pirates had vanished overnight when they realized human monitoring stations could track any ship anywhere in real time. Border disputes had ended when both sides discovered that human peacekeeping advisors would arrive within hours of any aggressive action. Even natural disasters were handled so efficiently that most populations never knew they had been in danger. Peace had never been so complete or so absolute. So why did Zephyr feel like her people had lost something precious? The answer came to her as she watched a human patrol ship approach the planet. It was sleek and beautiful, its technology so advanced that it seemed more like a work of art than a weapon of war. But she noticed that it never came close enough for Kytherian sensors to get detailed readings. The humans shared their defensive technology freely, but they kept their offensive capabilities hidden. That was the problem. The galactic community had become powerful, but it was power they didn't control and didn't understand. Zephyr activated her personal communicator and sent a message to Admiral Chen. It was time for an honest conversation. The meeting took place in the diplomatic chamber of the human monitoring station orbiting Kythera Prime. Zephyr had expected a sterile military environment, but the room was surprisingly comfortable. The humans had somehow created an atmosphere that felt safe and welcoming while still making it clear that they controlled everything that happened there. Admiral Chen greeted her with the same calm professionalism she had shown since the first day of the war. But Zephyr had learned to read human expressions during the past 6 months, and she could see something new in Chen's eyes. Not hostility, but a kind of patient watchfulness that made her feel like she was being evaluated. "Chancellor Zephyr," Chen said, gesturing to a chair that had been designed specifically for Kytherian physiology. "Thank you for coming. I understand you wanted to discuss the current security arrangements." "I wanted to discuss the future," Zephyr replied. "Admiral, my people are grateful for everything humanity has done for us. You saved our lives and our civilization, but we need to understand what comes next." "What do you mean?" "We need to understand what humanity expects from us. What kind of relationship we're going to have going forward." Chen was quiet for a moment, studying Zephyr's crystalline features. "What kind of relationship would you like to have?" It was a simple question, but Zephyr knew it was also a test. The wrong answer could change everything. "We want to be partners," she said carefully. "Not subjects, not dependents. Partners. Partners." Chen repeated the word as if she were tasting it. "That's an interesting concept. What would partnership look like to you?" "Mutual respect, shared decision-making, the ability to say no when we disagree with human policies." "And if your decisions put your people in danger?" There it was, the heart of the matter. Zephyr had known this question would come. "Then we accept the consequences of our choices. That's what freedom means." Chen leaned back in her chair, and, for the first time since Zephyr had known her, the Admiral smiled. Not the sharp, predatory expression she wore during military operations, but something warmer and more genuine. "Chancellor, do you know how humanity first achieved interstellar travel?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Zephyr sensed it was important. No. We destroyed ourselves. 3 times. Nuclear war, engineered plague, and something we call the AI catastrophe. Each time we barely survived. Each time we learned that freedom includes the freedom to make mistakes that kill billions of people. Zephyr felt her crystal form grow cold. I don't understand. We learned that some choices are too dangerous to leave to individual groups. When we encountered the galactic community's distress call, we recognized the pattern. Peaceful civilizations, facing an existential threat they couldn't handle. We've seen it before. Where? Chen gestured toward the viewport where stars filled the darkness of space. Out there, beyond your local galaxy cluster. There are things in the universe that make the Devourers look like children playing with toys. Things that eat entire galaxy clusters. Things that can unmake reality itself. The words made Zephyr's crystal structure vibrate with fear. Are they coming here? Eventually. That's why we can't afford to have 40 different species making 40 different decisions about how to defend themselves. That's why we need integrated command structures and standardized technology. Not because we want to control you, but because scattered defenses always fail against coordinated attacks. Zephyr was quiet for a long time, processing what she had heard. Finally, she asked the question that had been bothering her for months. Admiral, when your people received our distress call, how long did it take you to decide to help? About 6 seconds. 6 seconds? For a decision that committed your entire fleet to an interstellar war? Chen's expression grew serious. Chancellor, humanity has a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. When we heard that entire civilizations were about to be destroyed, there was no decision to make. There was only action to take. But you brought such overwhelming force. You didn't just defeat the Devourers, you erased them from existence. Because half measures don't work against existential threats. If we had driven them off, they would have returned stronger. If we had negotiated with them, they would have used the time to prepare for a larger assault. The only solution was complete elimination. Zephyr understood now why the human response had been so extreme. They didn't think in terms of individual battles or limited objectives. They thought in terms of permanent solutions to permanent problems. What about us, she asked. Are we a permanent problem that needs a permanent solution? You're a permanent responsibility, Chen replied. When we decided to help you, we accepted the obligation to keep you safe, forever, if necessary. Whether we want that protection or not. Chen was quiet for a moment. Chancellor, what do you think would happen if we withdrew our protection tomorrow? Zephyr started to answer, then stopped. The truth was that without human technology, the community couldn't defend itself against anything more dangerous than pirates. Without human monitoring stations, they couldn't even communicate effectively across interstellar distances. We would be helpless, she admitted. And within a generation, some new threat would destroy everything you've built. We've seen it happen too many times to let it happen again. So we have no choice? You have choices. Lots of them. You can build whatever kind of society you want. Create whatever art speaks to your hearts. Explore whatever mysteries fascinate your minds. The only choice you don't have is the choice to make decisions that would get your people killed. Zephyr felt a strange mix of frustration and relief. The humans weren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They were something much more complicated. Protectors who would never let their charges grow up. There's something else, Chen said. Something I think you should know. What? The community isn't our first contact with peaceful civilizations. We've encountered 12 other galaxy clusters with species similar to yours. All of them faced threats they couldn't handle. All of them sent out distress calls. What happened to them? They're all safe now. Protected by human monitoring networks, defended by human fleets. Living peaceful, productive lives under our security umbrella. 12 other galaxy clusters. Millions of worlds and trillions of beings, all living under human protection. The scale of it made Zephyr's crystal structure ring like a bell. How many species does humanity protect? Right now, about 4,000 sapient species across 17 galaxy clusters. And how many species has humanity ever had to remove? Chen's expression darkened. 47. All of them were either actively genocidal or posed existential threats to peaceful civilizations. We don't enjoy that part of our job, Chancellor, but sometimes it's necessary. Zephyr left the meeting with her understanding of the universe completely changed. Humanity wasn't just a powerful species that had decided to help their neighbors. They were gardeners on a cosmic scale, carefully tending to civilizations they deemed worth protecting, while ruthlessly eliminating threats to the garden's peace. The galactic community would never be free in the way they had once understood freedom, but they would be safe in a way that few civilizations in the universe could claim. As she returned to Kythera Prime, Zephyr looked up at the human ships patrolling overhead and felt something she hadn't expected: gratitude, not just for being saved from the Devourers, but for being considered worth saving by beings who could reshape galaxies with their will. The humans had given them the greatest gift possible in a dangerous universe: the right to remain innocent. The right to create beauty and pursue knowledge without worrying about the darkness between the stars. It wasn't the freedom her people had dreamed of, but it was something perhaps more precious: the certainty that their children would live to dream their own dreams. In the end, that was enough.